What is up, everybody? Welcome into the Two Stripes podcast, the podcast that covers everything college football. My name is Colton Denning, and I am your host, coming to you from Boulder, Colorado on Friday, June 30th, 2017. We are close to the weekend. We are close to Independence Day, July 4th, one of the best times of the year. And I couldn't be more excited to hop on the podcast today and give you guys a new episode. Want to thank everybody for tuning into the show today, and just want to drop a quick reminder that you can find the show on soundcloud.com/twostripespod or by going to Apple Podcasts and searching the Two Stripes podcast, and you can subscribe and leave some feedback there. One thing that we have done on this podcast a lot since its inception is talk about the SEC East. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but for whatever reason, we've previewed almost every team in the SEC East. I think South Carolina is the only one at this point that I haven't done. But yesterday, I had the opportunity to chat with Terry Lambert, who is one of the editors over at RockyTopTalk.com, SB Nation's Tennessee website, about the Volunteers and the crazy world that is Tennessee football heading into 2017. And if you keep up with Tennessee at all, you know that head coach Butch Jones is a hot topic of discussion. He's heading into his sixth season there in Knoxville, has a 39-25 record. Tennessee's gone 9-4 the past two seasons. He's one of those guys that I think you either love him or you hate him. There really isn't any middle ground if you're not a Tennessee fan of how you feel about him or that program, to be quite honest. It is very interesting to hear what Terry had to say about Butch Jones and his status as the head coach at Tennessee and where they're headed in 2017 after losing so many productive pieces in guys like Josh Dobbs, Derek Barnett, who was an absolute monster, Alvin Kamara, who was really, really good and underrated at running back / wide receiver / punt returner for them. But they have a group of guys that just left the program who were able to kind of stabilize it after the Derek Dooley years. But those guys are all gone now. And Tennessee is bringing in a lot of new blood, and it may be at the wrong time for Butch Jones because it feels like this year may be make or break for them. And with a schedule that includes games at Florida, Georgia at home, LSU at home, and, of course, at Alabama, it may be the wrong time to have a new cast of characters. But there's a lot of talent at Tennessee, and definitely a team that is going to be in the spotlight, whether the young players step up and they emerge as the favorite in the SEC East, or the new faces don't play well and they take a step back and Butch Jones' job status becomes a topic of conversation as the season goes on. But you've probably heard enough of me yapping about it. Let's get into this week's Two Stripes podcast. I am very excited to be joined by one of the editors over at RockyTopTalk.com, Terry Lambert. Terry, how you doing today, my friend?
Doing good, Colton. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for joining the show. University of Tennessee football, coming off two straight 9-4 seasons. Butch Jones, 39-25 record in his 5 seasons. How would you assess the health of where the program is at heading into Butch Jones' 6th year at Tennessee?
I think the best way to put it is stabilized. I don't think a lot of people realized how bad of shape the roster was when Derek Dooley got fired. He actually brought in a recruiting class without an offensive line commit. So Butch had to wade through a lot of stuff just to get Tennessee back on a respectable level. Now, I'd say he's done that. You know, Tennessee is a respectable program right now. But Butch leaves you wanting a little more. You know, it's year 5 now. Got 4 recruiting classes under your belt. You've got a great one coming in this season. So, you know, Butch is kind of, it's time. It's time to show us something.
I see the talent that Tennessee has, especially that they had last year with Derek Barnett, Josh Dobbs, Alvin Kamara, and a couple of other big-name players. They don't win the East. They've had games in the last couple of seasons. The Oklahoma one at home comes to mind where they should have won, but maybe conservative play calling or thinking cost them the game. Do you think that he gets a fair rep from people outside of the program that kind of look at him as like, yeah, he's a good coach, but maybe he doesn't have what it takes to bring that program over the top?
I think you hit the nail on the head with your last sentence there. We want to see him take that next step. He's done all these things, all these recruiting classes, top 5, top 10 recruiting classes. He's currently holds a top 5 2018 recruiting class. But, Tennessee sits at 9-4. And just about every analyst, myself included, thinks they'll take a little bit of a step back for reasons you just mentioned, just talent walking out the door. But 2016 was his year. 2016 was billed as the year Tennessee arrives. It didn't happen. They had that 5-0 start. They beat Georgia. They beat Florida. And then the wheels kind of start to fall apart against A&M. They lost that heartbreaker. Then you get blown away by Alabama. Then you get upset by South Carolina and Vanderbilt. So the big thing at Tennessee, you can't lose to Vanderbilt. Tennessee went 30 years without losing to Vanderbilt, and they're 2-2 since Butch has been here. You can't lose to Vanderbilt. So that's where the hot seat talk comes from. And he had a lot of injuries down the stretch last year. He was playing defensive ends at defensive tackles and linebackers at ends, and it was a disaster. But, at the same time, that kind of speaks to him. These are his players. He didn't have the depth necessary. So I'm kind of leaning in the middle. He's pretty polarizing in Knoxville. People either love him or they hate him. So I'm kind of in the middle. I see the work he's done on the trail, but eventually you have to win football games.
So out of that group that all went to the NFL and Josh Dobbs, Jalen Reeves-Maybin, Derek Barnett, Cameron Sutton, Alvin Kamara, and others, what do you think the legacy for them is? Because it feels like it's kind of complicated that, like you said, they were able to stabilize the program after Dooley left, but they weren't quite able to live up to maybe what their recruiting rankings suggested they should have done, especially when the SEC East was so wide open.
Yeah, I think Derek Barnett, from an individual standpoint, will go down as an all-time great, simply because he holds the sack record at the school and he broke Reggie White's record in his final game. So I think he's safe. But as a whole, the group will be viewed as kind of a bridge the gap type group, and it's unfortunate. I thought they were a great group of guys. Josh Dobbs, he was a warrior. That guy put the team on his back a couple times. Now, he let the team down a couple times as a passer, but, that group will be thought of as underachievers. And it stinks to kind of say that, but I think that's a fair assessment. They were preseason top 10, 12-1 national title odds, and you end up losing to Vanderbilt and going 8-4 and winning the Music City Bowl. So I think it's fair to say that they underachieved, and again, that kind of stinks to say.
Getting into 2017 and the on-the-field product this year, offensive coordinator Mike DeBoer leaves the program to go to Indiana, and Tennessee has a new offensive coordinator in Larry Scott, who was the tight ends coach and the special teams coordinator last year. Now, Scott has never been an offensive coordinator at the college football level, or any level for that matter, so it's hard to kind of know what his style is, but based off of what you saw in spring practices and then in the spring game, what can we expect from his offense, and are there any major philosophical differences from what he wants to do as opposed to what DeBoer did?
I think it's going to be status quo. This is Butch Jones's offense, and I don't think it's going to change. Where it might change or differ is at the quarterback position. Josh Dobbs isn't going to be there, so you're not going to see the read option type plays, every other play like we saw last year, just because Tennessee doesn't have the personnel to do it. They'll be welcoming in a new quarterback. So I'm not sure that it's so much as Larry Scott changing things up as just changing things up to fit your personnel. I really don't think we'll see too big of a change, but Scott has said that he will go under center a little more, which Tennessee virtually never did. I can count on one hand how many times I saw that last year. So maybe we'll see that a little more. We didn't see it much in spring, so maybe that's a little new wrinkle that Scott will throw in.
There's an interesting battle of different styles at that quarterback position heading into 2017. You got junior Quentin Dormady, and he's more of the classic drop back passer and that 6'4", 215 mold, and he's seen some action the past 2 seasons. And then there's redshirt freshman Jarrett Guarantano, who was a blue chip recruit and more of a dual threat guy. How did that battle play out in spring ball, and is that something that's going to continue into fall practice and even up close to the season?
It's definitely not done. It's still raging on. The coaches won't give on anything. Just from an outsider looking in, though, you got to think that Quentin Dormady has the upper hand. You know, he's kind of waited for this opportunity. He knows the offense. The offense isn't going to change too much, like I just said. So I think Dormady's comfort within the offense is going to give him the upper hand. You know, he went 10 for 10 in the spring game and threw 2 touchdowns. So he looked really, really great. He was sharp. Looked in control, looked like he knew what was going on out there. And I can't really say that for Jarek Garantano. Again, he's a redshirt freshman, so he might be a little bit behind Dormady in terms of the playbook. And Dormady's not a nothing running around back there. He's going to give you a little bit of athleticism. So my gut tells me Dormady gets the job, but Garantano's really, really close. And the coaches have said we haven't made a decision yet, but I'd be pretty surprised if it's not Dormady.
You mentioned Scott kind of playing to his offense's personnel strengths. And do you expect, if Garantano wins the job, there to be a lot more read option like there was with Josh Dobbs? Or is there really, no matter who wins the job, kind of the base offense is going to stay the same, just little tweaks here and there?
I would expect it to stay the same. And you know, when they had Justin Worley a couple of years ago, I know it was a total different offensive coordinator. They still ran the read option, even when Worley offers you virtually nothing in terms of running ability. So either guy that's going to be back there, the read option was just such a bread and butter part of that offense. And you know, I don't know how you replace a guy like Josh Dobbs, at least his production. You know, it seemed like Tennessee didn't play very well when they didn't get that rushing production out of Dobbs. So I'm really interested to see how they use the quarterbacks in the run game, or if they just lean completely on John Kelly and Ty Chandler.
Can you guarantee that in the time it takes us to record this podcast and then for me to put it out on Friday that Shariron Jones won't transfer back to Tennessee?
No, I can't. I have no idea. No, you know, he was a guy that just got caught up in the numbers game. He was actually became famous at the battle at Bristol, you know, for kind of being the Vols hype guy. So he was the bench leader, but he ended up going JUCO. So I think he's done, but I can't rule anything out.
Well, and it's funny because out here in Colorado going into the season, Sefo Luafau, the Buffs quarterback, was a senior heading into last year, and he had a Liz Frank injury, and it didn't seem like, or at least it was up in the air whether he might play. And I remember when Jones transferred, me and my buddies were like, okay, sweet. CU has a quarterback. I don't know anything about this Jones guy, but he's transferring in. And then like 2 weeks later, it was like, nope, he's back to Tennessee.
Yeah, a bizarre situation. When Garantano came, you know, the writing was pretty much on the wall for Jones. So I'm not sure what possessed him to come back, honestly, but he's going to go the JUCO route, and we'll see what he does next year.
So for all you Shariron Jones fans, there was 3 good minutes on the podcast of him. Switching to the running game, Tennessee has to replace over 2,000 yards rushing and 24 touchdowns from Dobbs, who went over 1,000 yards, as well as Jalen Hurd and Alvin Kamara, who probably should have got the ball more. Junior running back John Kelly was very explosive and very efficient in the 98 carries that he got last season. And I kind of think that with him, sophomore Carlin, Phil's aim, and then highly touted running back Ty Chandler coming in, and one of the most experienced offensive lines in the country, Tennessee's run game may not fall back that much. Do you think that that's reasonable, that despite all of those losses, including Josh Dobbs, that Tennessee is going to have a very good run game again this year?
I think it actually may step forward, and that's kind of a bold statement to say, but
I agree.
John Kelly's really good. I think he's going to end up being a household name before it's all said and done. The guy just runs angry. He's not very big, but man, he's a tough tackle out there. So I think he's ready to handle the workload. And like you said, Ty Chandler coming in, I would expect him to hop into that number 2 running back role. And then behind him, you've got Phil's Ames, but there's nothing behind him. So John Kelly's going to get a huge workload. The only real reservation I have there is what happens if Chandler or Kelly go down. There's just not a lot of depth there. So you're talking about walk-on types that would have to fill that role. So up front, Tennessee's got really a ton of experience. I think the second most experience in the country. And then you throw the number 1 overall recruit, Trey Smith, in there. probably going to start at left tackle before it's all said and done. So I'm excited about the Vols up front. It's been a point of weakness for 3, 4, 5 years now. They lost the line of scrimmage a ton last year. They lost the line of scrimmage battle to App State last year. So that's when I knew that things could be going south in a hurry last year. But yeah, John Kelly's going to get a lot of run, just replacing Alvin Kamara, Jalen Hurd, and Josh Dobbs, really. So I hope they don't run him into the ground. But Ty Chandler's going to have to come out of the gates ready to roll.
We talked about how big it is for them to replace Josh Dobbs and what he meant not only in the passing game but in the running game too. But Kamara was one of the most underrated players in the country, and I think he's a guy that, especially playing for the New Orleans Saints, is going to be utilized to his strengths and be a very good NFL player. But is there anybody on the roster who can replicate what he gave them last year? He had over 500 yards rushing and 40 catches as well. And is that something to where the offense is going to change? Because at least right now, there isn't a proven guy that can do that many things for them.
The short answer is no. Kamara was such a explosive, unique player. He won in a number of different ways. And he's kind of a sore spot to Tennessee fans because he wasn't utilized like he should have been. He didn't get the touches. I don't have the number in front of me, but he averaged over 7 yards a touch. And, Butch was giving carries to Jalen Hurd, who was largely ineffective before he ended up leaving Tennessee, and now he's ended up at Baylor. But no, I don't think Tennessee has anything on the roster. Again, we'll see about Ty Chandler. He's kind of the unknown. He was a 4-star back. But I think Tennessee's going to be in good hands with John Kelly. We'll see how John Kelly is as a receiver. That's something we don't know. That's not a role that he was put in last year because Kamara was on the team. So I'm confident in John Kelly. He's going to be Tennessee's offense pretty much for the early part of the year at least.
Wide receiver Juwan Jennings and tight end Ethan Wolf are kind of the only true experienced players out wide in the passing game for whoever wins that quarterback job. But there are a lot of talented but inexperienced options behind them. Who are some of the guys that you think can step up and fill those roles and become major players by, the midpoint or late in the season?
Yeah, more unknown here. Tyler Bird is the guy that was kind of used as a return guy, as a reverse guy, as a gadget guy. He's probably going to fill that slot receiver role. He's electric. He's got some speed. He's 6', 195. A guy that I'm excited about and that has kind of showed out in camp is Marquez Callaway. He's a 6'2", 190 sophomore. He's going to be opposite of Jennings, most likely. I think that's going to be your game breaker type. Behind him, you've got some experience in Josh Smith. He's kind of a limited guy. And then after that, it's anybody's guess. So Tennessee's got to have some receivers emerge into that 4th and 5th and 6th guy in the rotation. A lot of talent there, just I don't know who's going to emerge. So your guess is as good as mine, pretty far down on that wide receiver depth chart.
So switching to the defense, they had a really tough time against the run last year, and that was with Derek Barnett kind of basically doing anything that he wanted to opposing offenses. How much of an emphasis was put on getting better up front this season and stopping the run? Because it's not like there isn't talent there. You look at guys like Shai Tuttle, Reggie McKenzie, Kyle Phillips, and Jonathan Kongbo. These are all very talented players who came in with good pedigree, and it seems like they should be much better up front and maybe improve even despite losing Derek Barnett.
I think you saw the emphasis when Butch hired Brady Hoke. Brady Hoke is now Tennessee's defensive line coach, the former Michigan head coach, and he was at Oregon last year coordinating that defense. So Hoke comes in and he's tasked with maximizing all these 4- and 5-star recruits that have, to be honest, underperformed to this point. So you've got guys like Kongbo, who was supposed to come in and be an immediate difference maker. It didn't happen last year. So Kongo's going to be your number one pass rushing option. You've got Kyle Phillips, DeAndre Johnson. I'm leaving some people out. Darrell Taylor. Those guys have to step up and live up to their talent for Tennessee to be any good. In the middle, Shai Tuttle has been great when he's played, but 2 back-to-back season-ending injuries have stopped his progress. I'm not sure the depth is there, but Tennessee hopefully will get a little more fortunate on the injury front. They've hired a brand new strength trainer and changed all those programs up. So there's a lot of talent there, but they've got to live up to their potential.
You brought up the strength trainer, and Rock Gullickson is a guy he's very respected among NFL circles and comes in as Tennessee's new strength and conditioning coach. How big of a difference do you expect him to make, especially when it comes to playing in the trenches?
They've put a ton of emphasis into that. So it's hard to say without being around the program, but it's going to be pretty disappointing if that doesn't make a huge difference. So they hired him away from the Rams, and Tennessee couldn't have been any less fortunate last year. So that arrow has to be pointing up.
So they lose 20 of their 30 sacks from last season in Derek Barnett and Corey Vereen. You brought up hiring Brady Hoke. Is it just another one of those things like we're talking about with the run defense that the pieces are there? It's just a matter of putting those guys in the right position and getting the production out of them from a pass rushing standpoint?
Absolutely. So you're going to see Jonathan Kongbo. This is his year. This is his moment. He was a 5-star JUCO guy. Tennessee wrestled him away from Ole Miss. 6'6", 270. He's got all the ability in the world. He's got to put it all together. So he played a little bit of end last year, but he was forced to play out of position inside last year because of all the injuries. So putting him back in his more natural position on the strong side end, it should pay dividends. And again, guys like DeAndre Johnson, Kyle Phillips, Darrell Taylor are going to have a chance to compete and fill that void that Corey Vereen left on the other side. So, like you said, replacing most of Tennessee's sacks last year, some big shoes to fill for all these guys.
So looking at the secondary, an area they really struggled last season was giving up explosive plays, gave up a lot of big plays through the air. Is that something that was a pass rush issue, or was it a green secondary who brings back some pieces this year? What can they do to just be a more improved unit this season? Because it seems like, I mean, and maybe this is a theme, that they should be much better than the output that they've had the last few seasons.
Absolutely. Last year was a case of Bob Shoop, new defensive coordinator. I think it was a new scheme. I think it was a little bit of a combination of that and just pure inexperience. And then the talent too. They just didn't really have the talent back there. You know, you've got a bunch of names back there: Justin Martin, Rashad Golden, Emmanuel Mosley, Marquil Osborne. Got to step up. You know, once again, that's a theme. Got to step up and play to your potential. Todd Kelly Jr. will fill that strong safety role. He's probably the best defender the Titans. Sorry, excuse me. The Vols. I write for the Titans too. He's probably the best player the Vols have back there, along with Rashad Golden. But Louisville transfer Shaq Wiggins. He's going to come in and probably start right away. He played at Georgia and he played at Louisville too.
He's been everywhere.
Yeah, he's been everywhere. So Tennessee's going to get one more year out of him, and he's probably going to start at one of the corner spots. So we're all hoping that Shaq can come in and kind of fill the shoes that Cam Sutton left.
Heading into fall practice, what do you think is the biggest strength and the biggest weakness for this defense?
Oh, man, it's tough to say. It really is. There's so much turnover. I'd probably say the biggest strength is probably the two linebackers in the middle. Cortez McDowell is a good player. Jalen Reeves-Maben is gone. I don't think they'll miss a beat there. They've finally got some depth there. Darren Kirkland Jr. as well. So those two guys in the middle there should be pretty stable. You know, you'd like to say the defensive line is going to be a strength, but you just haven't seen these guys play, and they haven't played up to their potential. And the same goes for the secondary. So the defense is really tough to project. You would hope year two in Bob Shoop's scheme, some things would start to come together, but it's really hard to project.
Evan Berry is probably the best kick returner in the country when he's healthy, and it seems like, at least for right now, that he's heading into the season with a clean bill of health. Is his status something to where, like, for as long as we get him healthy, it's great, but don't count on it for a full season?
You know, I haven't heard an update on Evan. He's certainly a huge piece of the Tennessee team. He's just a game breaker. You know, he hasn't really made too much of a difference on defensively, but Tennessee's got to have this guy returning kicks because, I mean, he's a guy that can flip field. I don't have the stat in front of me, but he was an All-American kick returner for Athlon Sports. Multiple touchdowns, really just changed several games, just dropped him on its head. And it's rare that a kick returner can do that. But yeah, Tennessee has to have that guy.
Yeah, averaged over 38 yards per kick return in 2015 with 3 touchdowns. And then last year averaged over 32 yards with 1 touchdown. So certainly a guy that can change the game. And as we've seen, those hidden yards and special teams are stuff that maybe the difference between winning an SEC championship or not making it to the SEC championship. So definitely something to look out for is Evan Berry's health. But getting back to the defense, what's the fear level like heading into that week 1 game against Georgia Tech's offense? Not only because there's so many new pieces, but specifically just planning against that offense and kind of the uniqueness that it brings to the teams that Tennessee usually plays on their schedule.
Fear level is high. Anytime you face that flex bone, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're Alabama. The fear level is high. That offense just has a way of draining the clock and the misdirection. It's just hard to get a handle on. And Georgia Tech's probably the highest caliber school to run it. So to come out of the gates with all this uncertainty on defense, like I've mentioned, Tennessee's going to get a really tough test, especially up front. So those 2 linebackers I mentioned, they're going to have to be on their A game. They're going to have to be gap sound. They're going to have to be aware of what's going on around them. So you hope the Tennessee offense could outscore them and the defense won't be an issue. But anytime you play that flex bone, man, it's scary.
2 weeks later, they travel to Gainesville to play Florida at the Swamp. And is there ever going to be a game between those two that isn't a heart attack inducing?
Well, for several years, back when Tebow and Leak were there, Florida ran Tennessee into the ground. So I'll take a heart wrencher over a blowout any day of the week. But yeah, I think the 2 teams are close. I think the line has already come out, and I was kind of surprised it was so high at Florida by 9.5. So that probably stems from playing down in the Swamp this year and all the turnover on Tennessee's roster. But yeah, that's a tough test, especially for a quarterback that you're trying to break in.
It's so hard to say that one game is make or break in a 12-game season, but for a team so young, do you think that type of game, not only a rivalry, but playing on the road, is something that can define this team heading into that later portion of the schedule?
Absolutely. I'd say just about every year the Florida finds your season if you're Tennessee. It's just the winner of that game just goes into the driver's seat of the SEC East. So Tennessee lost that game for a decade. So it kind of speaks to where Tennessee's been since Philip Fulmer was fired. So absolutely, that game is make or break for Tennessee. It just seems to have a ripple effect on the rest of the SEC East.
Tennessee also plays Alabama and LSU out of the West. Something interesting that I talked about with the guys at Good Bull Hunting in the last podcast episode was this idea of strategic losses. Butch Jones and Kevin Sumlin are kind of in the same position where it's not like they're going 7-6 every year. They're kind of steady, but for whatever reason, maybe they're not getting over that hump. If Tennessee goes 8-4 again this year, but beats LSU and beats Florida, is that different than going 8-4 and losing that game to Florida and losing to LSU at home?
It probably is. The big thing for Butch is he can't lose to Vanderbilt, and that's the honest truth. And he's never beaten Will Muschamp at Florida or South Carolina. So I think he needs to get over those 2 humps and kind of assert himself there. But I think 8-4 is his target. I think most plugged-in people are aware of what's going on with this roster and how much has been taken from him. So I think 8-4 is his goal, and he'd never say that. Of course, your goal is to win the SEC title. It's just not going to happen with Alabama sitting down there. But 8-4 is a good number. It would certainly be a step back. But all things considered, that's a good season. But where it gets a little hairy is if you go 7-5 and you lose a game to Vanderbilt, you lose a game to South Carolina or Missouri or Kentucky, and then you've got a real question on your hands. Anything under 7-5, I think he's gone. The big thing here, I'm sure you talked to the A&M guys about it, Chip Kelly's sitting out there on the market. He's going to be the driving force of the coaching cycle this year. So what happens if Butch is sitting there at 4-4? What happens if he starts slow? Will new AD John Curry pull that plug and get out ahead of the Chip Kelly thing? We'll see, but that's something to keep in the back of your mind.
And ultimately, if he does end up getting fired and something we talked about at the start of the podcast. Do you think that his legacy at Tennessee will be he built the program back up, he put it in a much better place than it was post Dooley, but ultimately he just wasn't the guy to take it to the next level, but he did what he could?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. If you're ranking coaches on a scale of 1 to 10, Butch is probably about a 7. He's good off the field. He can recruit. He's an okay in-game coach. He just can't get over the hump. And part of that is Alabama, the runaway freight train that is Alabama. But the lasting memory, if he's fired, is he couldn't win the SEC at its lowest point in a long time. So the SEC East has been there for the taking, and he just hadn't done it. So it's an unfortunate legacy for him, but that's certainly what it would be if this year is his final year.
Last question for you. What do you think a fair expectation for Tennessee is in 2017 after losing so many pieces from last year's team?
My number is 8-4. It's hard to ask this roster to go down and compete with Alabama, to compete with Florida in the swamp, to compete with LSU. I think Georgia's a gettable game, but they've got to stand up and win South Carolina, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, the games that they're supposed to win. So I think 9 wins is probably your ceiling here before a bowl game. I think a realistic expectation is somewhere between 7 to 9 wins. And my prediction is probably closer to that 7-5 range.
Well, if you want to follow any of what should be a very exciting and newsworthy season in Tennessee football, no matter what happens, I would recommend that you go to RockyTopTalk.com, follow all of their coverage of Tennessee football and Tennessee athletics, and follow them on Twitter at RockyTopTalk, and follow Terry on Twitter at TLambertFB for all Tennessee stuff, all Titan stuff, anything football related. Give him a follow at TLambertFB. Terry, thank you for joining the show, and I'm really excited to see how the season plays out for Tennessee this year.
I appreciate it, Colton.
Tennessee is in for a very fun season with all the new faces on offense and defense coming in there. So I'm very excited to see what they do and see how things shake out for Butch Jones, because it could end up being his last year at Tennessee. And if they do end up firing him, it's a very attractive job, and one that, whether you like him or you don't like him, he's been able to build back up to respectability after where it was with Derek Dooley. And I really wouldn't be shocked to see Tennessee have a good year and for those new faces to step up and to win the East. You take a look at the rest of that division, and for all of the talent that Florida and Georgia have, they're still not complete teams by any measure and far from being unbeatable. So despite all of their youth, Tennessee should be right there in the mix of winning the SEC East and going to their first SEC title game since 2007. It's just a matter of whether those young players who come in with high pedigrees, whether they can step up to the plate and play well enough to get them there. And on the subject of the SEC East, I think at this point I've previewed every single one of the teams in that division except for South Carolina, because nobody wants to talk about Will Muschamp. Let's be real for a second. But if you want to go more in depth on that division, you can go back into the Two Stripes podcast archives and listen to all of those episodes. Your first option is to go to soundcloud.com/twostripespod. You can find them all there, or go to Apple Podcasts, search the Two Stripes podcast, and subscribe, leave a review. Tell me what I need to do to make this show better. Any feedback helps, and I appreciate you listening and subscribing. Also, big thanks to Terry Lambert once again for joining the show. Make sure to go to RockyTopTalk.com, follow them on Twitter at RockyTopTalk, and follow Terry on Twitter at TLambertFB. That's it for today's show. I will be back next week with another episode of the Two Stripes podcast. Not sure who or what we're going to be talking about yet, but you can rest assured there will be at least one new episode next week. Hope everybody has a fun and safe weekend as we head into July 4th, and you get to spend some quality time with friends, family, and loved ones. Until the next time we talk, though, I want to thank you all for listening. My name is Colton Denning. and this is the Two Stripes Podcast.